This is coming from the student of Facebook Academy. Your subscription worth more than you might ever think. Please don't forget to subscribe after watching this video. This is a write-up establishing the fact that total lockdown might not help in Africa, written by Paul Richard and Alex De Waal. Many African countries have introduced lockdown in order to halt the spread of coronavirus, but as Alex De Waal and Paul Richard argues, ordinary people have to be involved in choosing the solutions that will work for them. Countries on the continent have learned from tackling epidemics such as HIV and Ebola that should be put to good use as they face the impact of COVID-19. The most important lesson is that communities must be at the forefront of responding. This is not a pious mantra, but fact of life. First, infectious diseases outbreak unfold differently in different communities according to social conditions that only local people can know. Second, no control measures, for example, lockdown, can be imposed without the consent of the people affected. It is only when local people are fully involved in planning and implementing epidemic control measures that they can work. Public health officials develop a useful guide during the AIDS epidemic. Know your epidemic, know your response, and act on its politics. It is useful to think of COVID-19 not as a single global pandemic, but as a simultaneous outbreak of innumerable local epidemics, each one slightly different. The basic transmission mechanism of the virus are the same everywhere, but the spread and pattern of spread varies from place to place. A densely populated township will have a different trajectory to a middle-class suburb or a village. The epidemic will spread differently again in refugee camps and among nomadic peoples. Africans' disease burden is different in each case. The key factors are social behaviors such as greetings, mingling among the generation, and hand washing or maintaining physical distances. Experts can build their models based on assumptions on average, but only communities can know what this means for their particular circumstances. Africa has a burden of diseases different to other communities in the continental world. There are good reasons to fear the COVID-19 will be particularly dangerous to tens of millions of people with tuberculosis or whose immune systems are compromised by HIV. Little is known about what infection with the coronavirus means for people who have malaria or are malnourished. On the other hand, Africa's population is young. One reason given for Italy's high mortality rate has been that it has a large population. It has a large proportion of elderly people. 23% of the population is over the age of 65, who are most at risk should they contract the disease. By contrast, less than 2% of African population is over 65. For this reason alone, the virus mortality rate may be lower on the continent. It is clear that each African country will have to design its own response suitable for its own need. While government needs to talk to the people, government do not have the data and models for precise expert prediction and will not get them quickly enough. But there is a better method, tried and tested, talking with the communities. Doctors and epidemiologists can provide the medical fact. Communities can provide the contextual details and knowledge of what has worked for them in the past. China, Europe, and North America all adopted much the same epidemic control policy, lockdown. African government follow suit, but in general, lockdowns may be simply unworkable in the continent. Only in a few African countries, such as Rwanda and South Africa, have the capacity to administer a centralized strategy. For people living from day to day, reliant on hailing cars in the market to buy food, a few days lockdown is the difference between poverty and starvation. for people already suffering hardship because of unemployment, drought, or a swarm of locusts. Social welfare is provided by relatives. If a lockdown cuts these social ties, adversity becomes destitution. Lockdowns also threaten to interrupt supply chains of essential drugs to treat TB, HIV, and other diseases. If any form of lockdown is to work, emergency assistance may are needed. The lockdown which didn't work. This includes aid to those who have lost either their job or the money they received from family in Europe and America to keep food and fuel supply chains open. Some countries, for example, Uganda and Rwanda, are distributing free food. Ghana has announced free electricity, water, and a tax holiday. But African governments simply do not have the funds to sustain this kind of measures without international aid. If basic livelihoods cannot be secured, a comprehensive lockdown is not practical. Poor people will prefer the luxury of infection over the certainty of starvation. And the Ebola epidemic, when the Liberian government ordered the army to impose isolation on West Point in the capital Monrovia in 2014, it discovered within a few days that the lockdown was so unpopular as to be unfeasible. It did not stop transmission either. Very quickly, the government shifted to a policy of asking community leaders to design and enforce their own control policies. The simple lesson that public health works by consent was learned in Sierra Leone too. Communities took the lead in designing their own quarantine measures, which were then adopted by international agencies. What is needed in Africa? The key lesson for epidemic response are to act fast, but act locally. That is what African countries should be doing. Africa's health system are already overstressed. COVID-19 demands an emergency response at scale, and that begins with governments. African hospitals need testing kits, basic materials for hygiene, personal protective equipment for the professional health workers, and equipment for assisted breathing. There is a global shortage of all of these and a shameful scramble among developed countries to get their own supplies, relegating Africa to the back of the queue. But as the international response gains momentum, African governments should coordinate their needs, assessment, and supplies. A second pressing need is to set up field hospitals for the sort of cases that will arrive at the peak of the epidemic, which seems to typically be about 8 weeks after transmission in the community first becomes evidence of necessity. This must be very simple, tents in a school field, or even trout, or even thatched shed in the bush. There simply would not be enough respirators or intensive care unit. The modest aim is to ensure that family members can nurse patients with COVID-19 without disabling local hospitals or health centers. Keeping health facilities open to groups such as mothers and babies free of cross-infection with COVID-19 is another key aim, or else the increased illness and death from other causes could outrank the virus itself. Community can help by finding sites, constructing camps, and nursing patients according to a home care protocol for the virus, with health professionals supervising from a safe distance. An even bigger challenge will be keeping economies functional and stopping a slide into destitution and hunger. African countries cannot close its fresh produce markets or people will starve, but market goers can readily work out how to reduce the risk of transmission through measures such as better hygiene, crowd control, and physical barriers such as polythene sheeting at point of sales. Another proposal is that each household should designate a single person to buy food, and the market authorities provide that person with an identifier such as a colored bangle. This designated shopper would then be isolated from other household members on returning home. Some market could be temporarily relocated to several streets as well. In some countries, a switch to cashless mobile phone transactions may be workable. In other companies that send remittances home can be enlisted. What is most important is not a list of good ideas, but proper discussion with traders, customers, market authorities, chiefs, and local government. They are the ones who will know what will work for them and how it can be monitored and enforced. Lockdown have the potential to create a serious social crisis. This is not just in terms of creating poverty, hunger, and resentment, but also endangers the rollout of workable epidemic control measures. No time to lose. Today, public health experts have not proposed alternative to comprehensive lockdown. They have not explored local variants of isolation, movement restriction, contact tracing, and quarantine. That is because they have not yet had local communities for their proposals. There's no time to lose, and community consultation should begin now. The experience of handling epidemic such as HIV, Ebola, Ebola provide an encouraging lesson. Ordinary people are not the problem, rather they are the solution. The good news is that communities can quickly learn to think like epidemiologists, provided that epidemiologists are ready to think like communities. This piece is written by Alex De Waal, director of the World Peace Foundation, Tufts University, and the author of Peace and Power, Why There is No Political Crisis Yet, and co-authored by Paul Richard, an anthropologist and author of Ebola, How a People's Science Helped End an Epidemic. To receive more of interesting videos like this after minute page is published, don't forget to subscribe on Facebook Academy.